But another tribe that I love the music is Mongo. But Mongo, I love their music as well.
Yeah.
The way they dance, the
music is proper.
I just think it's just proper raw. Like it's not mainstream. It's not mainstream. Nothing. It is just raw, authentic music, and it's just beautiful. It's beautiful.
This video is for those genetically, socially and emotionally connected to indigenous DRC Congolese people, and this video has not been created to offend any person or ethnic group around the globe or any race or person around the globe. And I want to make it clear, I am not a Hebrew Israelite, I am not a Bantu, I'm not associated with any person or any group or any organisation or any movements that are like part of the woke school of thought or any awakenings or anything like that. Anything that is associated with what I've just mentioned, I am not associated with any person or any organisation. When I say person, I'm even talking about on an individual level. So, who are the Mongo people? This video is not going to be going into specific traditions and things of that nature. I'm just going to be basically telling you what you need to know and some key points about the Mongo people, so that you have the best foundation that you can have in regards to the origins and the Mongo people in general when you're using the term Mongo, or when you're referring to Congo and knowing who actually lives inside Congo, in other words. So generally speaking, Mongo people are indigenous to Central Africa. Invading Europeans had difficulty presenting to their mainstream academia precise information on Mongo people's origins. This is likely due to Mongo people's indigenous Central African origins and history causing disruptions to things like the Europeans' theory of a mass Bantu migration, like from Nigeria, Cameroonian highlands, or also due to the events that took place in the 19th century. So, for example, another reason for the unclear presented history of Mongo people in general is because in the 19th century, Mongo people were victims of genocide by invading Europeans, and part of the effort to relieve the invading Europeans from wrongdoing, even up to today, they systematically replace Mongo people's identity with the term Bangala, or they will use the term Congolese when they see fit, for the purposes of rewriting history or rewriting our origins indirectly, as they're doing this with the assistance of people with black faces at the moment. In more recent times up to today, this indirect rewriting of our history and origins will be enforced by mainstream scholars, people in academia and evil black social cult groups who enjoy referring to these photos that you see on the screen as Congolese people instead of calling these people Mongo people. So obviously sometimes people don't know, they just say yes, this is Congolese people, but we have people that are credible, that are so-called in the normal world, they are credible, you know, scholars or credible people within mainstream academia. They'll present this to the world as Congolese people. Not only that, sometimes they'll remove the captions that were initially associated with this photo, and they'll present these photos to associate it with other history, and they'll just call it African, so that you remove the identity of the Mongo people. They do this to support their Europeans in removing specificity from the Mongo identity, which helps the covering up of genocide. On the basis, Mongo identity and name has been removed from the atrocity stories about the 19th century Congo. when it is illustrated. So I repeat, so it removes the identity and the name Mongo when you're talking about the atrocities of what happened in the 19th century Congo when it's illustrated. It was once documented we were the majority of the whole of the area we know today as DRC Congo, which of course makes sense considering we are indigenous to Central Africa. However, we heavily declined along with many other groups who were categorized as hunter-gatherers, and some of these hunter-gatherer classifications were also attributed to what mainstream academia and academia psychopaths call pygmy. To cover the explanation of declining numbers or murders and sickness and displacement of Mongo people, it was engineered by the Europeans basically, and they will make reference to things like birth rate is the cause of why Mongo people are disappearing, and this is also used with hunter-gatherers, but mainly they put hunter-gatherers on the forefront of why they are declining, because they need to obviously demonize the term Bantu, which they engineer themselves. So they promote the term Bantu and demonize it at the same time because they control that entity, and it links back to obviously politics and geopolitics and social engineering. So it's like, for example, they've created like a straw man, in other words, and this straw man is called Bantu, and they control the direction of it, in other words, in terms of the history of it, who they're going to apply that term to, when they demonize it, when they promote it, etc, etc. And it's for the sole purposes of removing real indigenous names, real indigenous languages, and obviously political reasons which affect people today who live in DRC Congo. So in regards to what the invading Europeans can ascertain as far as origins and their timings on their timelines, basically it was documented by the beginning of the first millennium via way of population increase but not migration. These Mongo people would have already expanded in population and have been already situated around today's DRC Congo, Central African Republic as far as South Sudan and the Great Lake regions. And this would have been during the times of the early Egyptian dynasties, which we were not the founders of. So we are not Egyptians. It is very likely some of our Mongo forefathers had travelled to ancient Egypt from Central Africa during a time there would have been more vegetation across the Sahel near Chad and Sudan, leaving a print in our memory that we knew of ancient Egypt or some of our Mongo groups. And I say some of our Mongo groups, and you would understand why as I go along. The most probable direction of route towards Egypt from Central Africa would have been northeastwards down the Nile, as it was likely a common trade route to travel up and down from Egypt back to our Congo forests. Mongo people's presence in Egypt would not have included every Mongo group, meaning many would have remained as far near as south of today's Chad, all the way to Central African Republic, and all the way down to DRC Congo interiors, up to the Great Lake regions. So in relation to the Mongo people that would have remained in Central Africa, ultimately the beginning of Mongo people began in Central Africa, where we are still today. Our most ancient recorded ancestor outside of mainstream academia, our most ancient recorded ancestor was a forest hunter-gatherer named Ilele or Ilela, and his nickname was Bekoli. So sometimes we may call him Bekoli or we may call him Ilela, but for the purpose of this video we're just going to call him Ilela. And just so that you're aware, the nickname Bekoli is like in Limongo languages. Bekoli is usually associated with referring to an elder, Bekoli. Ilela would have had a wife named Mbomba or Mbombe. So Ilela and Mbombe would have been the first people of the Mongo people. The name Mongo comes after, but I'm just saying Ilela and Mbombe for the purposes of this story. Generally, the story is mythical regarding Ilela and Mbombe, which includes analogies and metaphors, and outside of mythology there are also facts regarding our existence and presence in Central Africa during ancient times, or what we call so-called ancient times, or near the beginning of times. So I want you to understand very clearly Mongo people in general. So when you're talking about a story, you will add analogies or metaphors, similar to how when people, for example, are rapping and they might drop a metaphor. It's not exactly the metaphor which is actually which they're actualizing, but they're just dropping a metaphor to explain a story, if that makes sense. So this story would have been traditionally sung around a campfire at night, led by a chief wearing feathers. I won't go into more details about the customs and traditions. I will leave that for other videos. The main purpose of this video is getting you to understand the key things about Mongo people. So in brief, the story starts from Ilela and Mbombe migrated from the Lopori region in today's DRC Congo up to Shwapa, where they settled in Shwapa. Mbombe was sweeping her front yard and a bird flew by and dropped a safu fruit beside her. Mbombe told Ilela to find where the fruits came from, so Ilela spoke to the bird and the bird directed Ilela to the safu tree. Ilela began picking safu from the safu tree, but did not realize it was a tree guarded by beings referred to or nicknamed as Sao Sao. These beings would go on to kill Ilela for picking from the safu tree. Mbombe felt bad for Ilela's death and was pregnant at the time. Mbombe suddenly had a strange birth, birthing nations of mythical beings, insects, beasts and short people. Then she wrapped the red earth Ngola over herself and birthed her official son, who was called Lianza, or Lianja. Lianza is how we usually pronounce it as well. After Lianza's birth, he was taken up to what we may describe as heaven and returned with a sword. He gathered all the beasts, entities and short people whom his mother had birthed and took them together to avenge his father's death by going back to the safu tree to fight the Sao Sao beings. Lianza defeated the Sao Sao beings and migrated further west inside DRC Congo and settled by a river where he helped his followers plant crops, and once he got tired he ascended from the earth. Various forms of this mythical tale is told and attributed to Lianza, with other characters I have not mentioned, just to keep this video as short as possible. I have just explained to you the key points of the story, and do remember, it is important to note this story took place in the region that we call Shwapa today, inside DRC Congo. Here is an example of an old audio recording of Mongo people in the 1940s. It was basically capturing a moment on how the story would have been traditionally sung and headed by a chief. Before the mythical ancestor Lianza departed, he had a child named Nyangwe, and it is not clear if Nyangwe was also a mythical character or a metaphor for facts around our existence and presence in Central Africa. My findings direct me to the understanding the entity or title Nyangwe would have been the first to travel down to Egypt from Congo forest via the Nile, and this entity or title Nyangwe would have had its beginnings from populations around the Shwapa regions up to the north of the equator, possibly people groups who are speaking Bopoto or Foto languages, which is a variation of Limongo languages. Generally, many of these groups would have been referred to as hunter-gatherers or pygmoid, which is a terminology no longer used. So going back to Nyangwe, I do not find it important to share my opinions about the entity or the term Nyangwe within Egypt. I'm talking about the term or entity Nyangwe. If it would have surfaced in Upper or Lower Egypt, I actually don't care. Generally speaking, there's never been a will amongst our elders to explain a precise story about our presence or activities in Egypt. Neither was there a will or an urge to assert our presence in Egypt. So I repeat, neither was there a will amongst our elders to assert our presence in Egypt. And before I go further, I just want to add, you will only find that approaching the 1950s onwards that there was a growing will from so-called civilized, educated Africans to assert their story of beginnings into the area we know today as Egypt or the Sahel, approaching the so-called Middle East, and this assertion was usually supported by invading Europeans or psychopaths involved with linguistics. So going back to Nyangwe, us Mongo people can assert Nyangwe would have had a child possibly around the regions we know today as the Great Lake regions up to Uganda regions. And it is important to note our descendants of the other legend, Lianza, would have still been residing in today's DRC Congo forest regions. So when Nyangwe had his child around these Great Lake regions or around the Uganda regions or the northeast regions of DRC Congo today, around those regions, Nyangwe named his child Mongo, and that is who we pay tribute to today. Mongo would have travelled back to the Lopori regions from the northeastern regions of today's DRC Congo. Within this journey, Mongo had a child named Membele, and Membele had a child named Kusu. They all settled around the region we know today as Bumba, which is basically the same Lopori regions as well. Around this region, Kusu had 3 children. One was named Njovu, the second was named Ngando, and the third was named Watambolo. Their stories surrounding Ngando, Jovu and Watambolo, the main synopsis is about 2 of the brothers argued about the sharing of an antelope that they hunted, which caused them to split in different directions. This story is the story of the extended descendants of Mongo, which I will save for another video. It is important to note this story is likely a variation of the story told by the Mbunza people's ancestors, who are also located in the Bumba region. Some of the oldest Mongo traditions and cultures are found in the Equator province down to the Bandundu and Shwapa, and these traditions and cultures are found amongst Mongo people speaking languages referred to as Limongo, Gundo, Lia or Ntomba languages. The earliest Mongo people refer to the concept of God as Zakomba, and the Za likely came from the extension of Lianza. It was the Equator province which was being observed prior to the planned mass genocide attempt by the Europeans, hence the creation of this letter from Queen Victoria's cousin, King Leopold. And going back to the term Nza, which would be the root word for Zakomba or Nzambe, the Nza would have usually been associated with animals, the forest and the habitat amongst the Mongo people. And I'm not going to go more deeper into that, but I just want to, just explain it to you briefly so that I can save other stuff for other videos. In other videos, I made a strong claim stating Mongo people were described as matriarchal prior to Catholic doctrines being forced upon us, accompanied by patrilineal cultures that would have come from Europe. Prior to this, the earliest Mongo descendants of Lianza would have had forest societies which Europeans would have described as matrilineal, and this is often the case with many other related groups around our habitats. Generally speaking, Mongo people did not create kingdoms or was a founder of any kingdom, and were precisely forest people accustomed to forest habitats in hidden locations, hence the name Bumba or Bomba, which could have been a metaphor for hidden amongst descendants of Mongo. I said generally speaking, as Bashong, Showa and Kasai Kwa people are documented founders of the Kuba kingdom, it's not widely known that they are also documented descendants of Mongo. However, respect is maintained by referring to them as Kuba people, as Kuba people are the authority of illustrating their origin and culture and nobody else. I say this to highlight there wasn't a central Mongo kingdom designed to gather all branches of Mongo. Mongo people in northern regions of DRC Congo has had historic clashes with people groups who were categorized as Nilotic or Hamitic, who would have had come from the Muslim slave raiding empires. The clearest records regarding this can be traced as far back as the 18th and 19th century, where activities from the Sahel and the Indian Ocean slave trade overlapped into the northern regions of today's DRC Congo, which caused the wars. It is documented Mongo people generally had deep resentment for some Muslim ethnic groups due to Islamic missionary activities associated with slave raiding. Some of these activities were supported by the late coming invading Europeans, who constructed artificial ethnic groups in the process of distorting the term Mongo. The Europeans did this to ensure their slave raiding armies remain allies of occupation. In regards to the Atlantic slave trade, we can use popular DNA science to illustrate Mongo people was barely affected from the transatlantic slave trade, which means it is unlikely Mongo people have a genetic relation to people referred to as African American, Black American, Caribbean or Black South Americans in other words. There is however paper material highlighting Mongo people ending up across the Atlantic, but this is best stressed outside of mainstream forums and platforms, and it's currently sensible for us GSE to currently refer to their own desired popular sources regarding the Atlantic slave trade. So going forward, when you hear the terms that suggest people of Congolese descent ending up in the Americas, it is likely talking about Bakongo people from Angola and some Teke people up to Congo Brazzaville. It is not referring to people from today's DRC Congo interiors, i.e. Mongo people. At the start of this video, I made reference to music because Mongo people love music and dancing, which likely stemmed from ancient times where music and dancing was used to pass on stories, proverbs and ceremonies even up to today. As Mongo people decline, so do our stories and traditions, so we must note the material I have presented regarding Mongo people is not widely known amongst people who call themselves Congolese, and they can even be Mongo themselves and do not know. This is on the basis today many Congolese people who are in pursuit of being westernized are not equally in pursuit of knowing their history outside of mainstream academia and black cult groups. Feel free to watch the rest of this video and feel free to ask any questions, and thank you very much for watching this video. Peace.
Bokilo bomona kabango na bapatala minane mebiaka banzembo nanga seko iba oye mabina nanga seko iba oye etikali moke se ibanya yo na mobima moto po atekisa na faranga oye bana witi boyaka to kanalelo e oyo yo yo amiga ibola e Nico Ekenga bana witi boyaka to kanalelo oyo yo yo bekila e Rasta Mokiage yo 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 Moa Jose oe koko Moa Jose Mami Sasa Osebiawa Aimi omo dogi ya Mayo nganya ma yedula Aimi omo dogi ya Mayo nganya ma dibate Aimi omo dogi ya Mayo nganya ma yiraro Moa mame wo gaga Elodi Bolumu wo gaga Moa mame wo gaga Mama doga si wo gaga Moa mame wo gaga Moa mame wo gaga Jobalar Nico Isaza na inge Bisone kwa tere mapera Isaza na inge Isaza loso mo Isaza na inge Stango Lima Tonton Mopau Isaza na piodie Bisone kwa tere mabongo Isaza na piodie Isaza na biodio Isaza loso mo Mama wogaga Molili kuma Yesanu nagira ngoye ye Molili kuma Yesanu nagira ngoye ye Shishi na mama na Nora na Angola Tige Lomboto Moli moyaga Moli mozoga Zona Mama yo 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 Masi amokuse Pesa mobali amokuse Mavanda libala Asala makambo ya mikuse Bonyoma Mama ye Mama yo 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 Mama ye Mama yo 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 Mobali ya molai Pesa masi ya molai yo Mavanda libala Asala makambo ya milai Bonyoma Mama ye Mama yo 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 Mobali ya shege Pesa mwati ya shege Mavanda libala Basala makambo ya bashege Bonyoma Mama ye Mama yo 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 Mama ye Mama yo 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 Wasaba mama ya bana Pesa mwati ya monene Mavanda libala Basala makambo ya milebo Bonyoma Mama ye Mama yo 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 Mobali ya moke Pesa mwasi ya moke Mavanda libala Basala makambo ya mike Bonyoma Mama ye Safira mama yo yo yo, mama ye, mama yo yo yo, Obali amaneti, esa e mwasi amaneti yo, Baba ndali bala, basala makambo ya maneti, Bonyoma, mama ye, mama yo yo yo, Obali amatama, esa e mwasi amatama oh. Bavanda libana, basala makambo ya matama, Bonyoma, mama ye, mama yo yo yo, Obali azua, esa e mwasi azua oh, Bavanda libana, basala makambo ya bazua, Bonyoma, ye, mama yo yo yo, Obali amondele, esa e mwasi amondele oh, Bavanda libana, basala makambo ya mindele, Bonyoma. Bonyoma, mama yo 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 yo, Boliri kubo ye, Boliri kubo ye.